Okay, so let's begin. So, welcome everybody to this webinar initiated by Padam Mobility and organized by Landor LINKS. So, welcome. Today we'll have the pleasure to talk about DRT, Demand Responsive Transport, and about its integration into a complex system. So integration of small operators, community transport groups into one unique user experience, customer experience, one brand, one fare system with constant standards, especially about, for example, transport accessibility. And with this question in the background, how software solutions could participate to this integration. So I will be your, I have the honor today to be your moderator for this webinar. Quick presentation of myself. So I am Ivan Toquet. I am a urban planning and transport consultant. I work for Transmission, which is a French company, and also participate to the structure called Team Mobility UK, which is next slide, please, Mark. Thank you. Which is a team of UK and international experts built to help LTAs. So I'm specialized for myself in bus strategy and franchising, and also I work on integration of DRT services at Transmission for LTAs in France and also in Belgium about how to integrate DRT services in wider contracts, for example. And so for today to speak on our subject, we have two speakers, and we have the pleasure to have Lisa Cook, passenger transport manager at Portsmouth City Council, and she will talk about the feedback on the integration of Pompeii links into wider and the construction of Pompeii links in Portsmouth, and also the feedback so in the UK, and also feedback from Pranav Chittur from Padam Mobility, account executive at Padam Mobility, who will talk about the integration also of DRT services in the province of Zeeland in the Netherlands. So, Lisa, I think I can let you the mic. And yeah, thank you, Juliana, for the quick remind. Yeah, if you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A box and not in the chat, please, so we can see them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And so,
Morning,
Lisa.
everyone. Let me just share my screen so that you can see the presentation. Hold on one second. Okay, you should be able to see my presentation now. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so thank you for having me this morning. As Ivan said, I am Lisa Cook. I am passenger transport manager at Portsmouth City Council, and I am here to talk to you about Pompeii Link, which is our DDRT offer in Portsmouth. So by way of background and why this is interesting, particularly for this webinar is at the back office for our DDRT service for Pompeii Link is actually shared. So going back to pre-COVID, Solent Transport, who are a strategic partnership between the 4 local authorities in the Solent region, so that's Hampshire, Isle of Wight, Portsmouth and Southampton, successfully bid for Future Transport Zone funding on behalf of the 4 local authority members. So Future Transport Zone, I'll refer to FTZ throughout the rest of the presentation. And that Future Transport Zone funding covered a wide range of initiatives such as a mobility as a service app, Breeze, you may have heard of that. It included micromobility, it included mobility credits, it had consolidation of deliveries, drone pilots, all kinds of things. But a key strand of it was a shared DDRT back office system for the 4 local authorities. So what we did in partnership is we worked together. Solent Transport led a tendering exercise, which the 4 authorities fed into. So we had a joint spec, we had a joint evaluation mechanism, and we jointly had a joint evaluation panel with all 4 members present to evaluate the tenders that we received. And that meant that we can ensure that the potential back office that would be achieved covered the ambitions of all 4 authorities. And it's quite the 4 authorities cover quite a range of geographies. So you've got Hampshire being predominantly rural, you've got Portsmouth and Southampton, the 2 cities, and then you've got Isle of Wight, uniquely an island and very rural itself. So we needed to make sure that the back office would suit all 4 of our kind of geographies and our situations. So what we ended up with was a shared app, which we've called Book a Journey, and you can see that on the screen there. And Book a Journey is the app for all DDRT services across, and some community transport services across the area. So potential passengers would go into Book a Journey, they'd select their zone, and then they'd end up with a bespoke kind of booking platform for their zone. So you would, at the entry point of Book a Journey, you see all the areas covered, you select your area, and then essentially you may as well be booking through an individual app. That's the passenger experience that they get. The positive of that, the shared app, is that we can share the development costs, we can share the licensing fee, and it's got one branding, it's consistent across a wide geographical area. So then Zeeland Transport, with its 4 constituent members, piloted multiple services using this app. So on Book a Journey, there have at various points, passengers have been able to book a dial-a-ride service, traditional dial-a-ride in Southampton, a rural independent community transport service on the Isle of Wight called FYT, Connect Transport on Demand in Hampshire, which is their DDRT offer in the north of Hampshire, PompeyLink, the service I'm going to talk to you about today, as well as a number of different traditional dial-a-ride type models in Hampshire. At various points, these have all been present on the app, and many are today. But I need to make it clear that not all were present on the app at the same time due to a variety of issues, not really app related, due to funding periods and suitability of services, all kinds of different things. But at various points, many services have been available through the Book a Journey app. So the lessons learnt then on our shared back office. Our traditional DDRT services have worked really well. So the one in Northern Test Valley is working well, PompeyLink is working well, and our more urban community transport services across the patch. So I'm thinking of your dial-a-ride type model in more urban areas. Less successful has been community transport models based on kind of more rural areas or kind of semi-scheduled services, and also the really traditional group hire community transport element wasn't successful in terms of its integration over to our shared app, just because the 2 models are so very different. They didn't align. It wasn't a compatible approach, and so that wasn't as successful as we'd hoped. And lastly, it's not on the slide, but I think it'd be worth mentioning, from the outset and as part of the tender process, we included our ambition to integrate the DDRT platform that we ended up with into the Mobility as a Solution platform, so that we'd have one and the same, so that the Breeze function would offer a one-stop shop for everything. That proved far more complex than any of us had envisaged. I mean, we went with our eyes open, but despite that, far more complex than we had envisaged. It needed much more development than we'd envisaged, and that came at a higher cost than we'd envisaged. And so that hasn't been successful. So that's a lesson learned, that integration of a MAS product and a DDRT product, it obviously can work. It works in a variety of examples across Europe, but in this particular setup, it didn't work so well for us. So I'm going to move on to DDRT in Portsmouth, and the rest of my presentation really focuses on this and what we were trying to solve in Portsmouth. So for those of you unfamiliar, not from the area, Portsmouth is the most densely populated city outside of London. It's uniquely an island city. We have Portsea Island in the south, and the further north, there is a large urban sprawl, which then meets Hampshire to the north, West Sussex to the east, and Southampton to the west. It's generally, because it's an urban city, very well served by a really mature commercial bus network that's been further enhanced through the BSIP funding we were given, and all the work we've been able to do there. It's a really fantastic bus network, but we had a problem, which was Port Solent. So I'm hoping you can see the slide, and you can see, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but for my screen, I'm circling Port Solent now. But Port Solent is the body of is the kind of development to the right of the body of water, Portsmouth Harbour, in my public transport map at the bottom of my screen. So you can see from my public transport map a number of green lines. Those green lines are excellent east-west. Those green lines are excellent kind of north-south skirving Port Solent, but miss out Port Solent completely. So it's a leisure development. You can see in my bottom right-hand side, the boats. So that there's a marina surrounded by restaurants, surrounded by bars, retail, a big cinema. So it's a destination people want to go to. It's also a really key employment destination, as well as having many, many homes in it. So we've got this area which is completely untouched by public transport since 2017, and that's commercially it wasn't viable. It takes quite a long time to get in and out of Port Solent because of the road network, and it just hasn't proved viable. The area to the north of Port Solent, Paulsgrove, as I said, it's got really excellent bus links east-west, but it has nothing to Port Solent. So it's not that community of people weren't linked to those leisure facilities, to those employment opportunities, and conversely, the people from Port Solent weren't linked to health facilities and to social facilities that they could achieve in Paulsgrove. So our mission really was to integrate Port Solent better into the public transport network that that Portsmouth has, and B, into its local community. It's also worth me saying Port Solent doesn't currently, or didn't until Pompey Link, have any accessibility via rail, which again was a disadvantage for visitors and residents alike. So what did we do? We introduced Pompey Link. It's a 10-month pilot. It launched on the 2nd of June. And it's operated by Community First, who are a community transport operator. Now, until this, we had no community transport operators operating in Portsmouth at all. So this is the first time we've seen, or certainly for a long time, seen community transport operators in Portsmouth. And we've been really keen throughout to integrate them into the public transport network, seeing them as an integral part of the overall network for passengers. They provide that north-south link. You can see my map on the bottom of my screen, and the blue blobs, that's all the bus stops that are served to the north, and then the destination bus stops in Port Solent at the south. And it provides those links for people from Port Solent to be able to access QA Hospital, which is a huge hospital in our local area, and also Cosham Railway Station, to be able to integrate into the rail network more widely to London and various other locations. There's also a key link. You can see the red road running along the kind of top of Port Solent, the A27. So it's there's a bespoke link for people from Port Solent directly to those bus services along the A27, and a unique fare for that journey as well of only £1, to really link people into the existing network, to make them feel like it's integrated and that it's an overall offer rather than a bespoke service one area that doesn't integrate into other areas too. The service operates Monday to Saturday, 9 a.m. till 7 p.m. We use two 16-seater accessible minibuses for that. The fares, I set the fares in the spec at the time of the £2 fare cap. So they're predominantly £2 single. A slightly further afield journey is £2.50 single, but no more. We accept bus passes. It's a bus stop to bus stop model. So you can see the blue blobs on my map below. There's a well-established network of bus stops in Paulsgrove. I saw no value in setting up anything other than using the existing infrastructure, and it's enabled us to better publicise the service anyway and integrate it better into the existing offer. We accept bookings up to 72 hours in advance, or within minutes on the day. And the back office and IT equipment were funded through the FTZ project, but the service itself, so the driver, the fuel, the vehicle, are funded through BSIP. And it's also probably worth me saying that we have Book a Journey, the app, but people can also book via the website. People can also book over the phone. At the moment, we have about 86% of people booking via the app, which reflects the demographics of who uses the service, in my view, and I'll come on to that again in a minute. So marketing and communication was really key for us, really, really key. We wanted to make sure that the communities were aware of what was going on, what it meant for them, how they could use the service. And we've worked really closely in partnership with both the operator of Community First and other stakeholders. So for example, the management company that run Port Solent, they're thrilled by this this initiative, and they've worked really proactively with all the employers to make sure that the employers on the development of Port Solent have access to information about Pompey Link. We've developed what I consider to be a really strong brand. Our vehicles are all branded. We're sharing that branding across everything we do in terms of the Pompey Link brand. And then we've also tried to identify that book a journey agnostic brand that we needed so that it could be shared across a wider geography. We park our vehicles at Port Solent. There's a big free car park there for visibility. Our drivers are constantly speaking to people walking past, asking them what the service is. We did out-of-home advertising, so at bus stops, bus shelters even. There's been a lot of community engagement. That's something that Portsmouth are really strong in. And we've had engagement officers going out and speaking to the community, engaging with them and educating them. We've done your traditional social media. You can see an example of that on the screen, our media releases, and the traditional kind of council communications through our magazines. One thing I wanted to mention, just because it's been so successful, was Communities First, as part of their tender, committed to a leaflet drop of all the homes in Paulsgrove on the service. And if you look at my little graph, I've got in the bottom right corner, well, it's right to me, maybe it's left to you, but it's certainly my bottom right. You can see the green line, which is the number of registrations we received week on week, and the peak with the little red circle around it coincided with that leaflet drop. It was really successful. So it obviously, social media is so important to get messages across, but it goes to show that that traditional kind of hard copy literature also has an impact too. We've seen national coverage. So we had a really, really brilliant visit with the Campaign for Better Transport crew, and they were so positive. It was lovely. Obviously, we've had the trade reviews and articles that you may have seen. Our next steps. We're really proactive about communication and marketing for this service. So we're going to do a bespoke campaign for those people who've registered to use a service, but they've not yet travelled. I want to understand why. And then following from that, we're going to be having bespoke focus groups with users and non-users to understand their lived experience of using the service and what works well, what doesn't work well, what we can improve, what they'd like to see changed. And that kind of iterative circle of monitoring and evaluation is really key, I think, to the long-term success of this service. So in terms of stats, what it's meant, we have to date nearly 300 users. I updated these stats as of Saturday. So as of Saturday, we had almost 300 registered passengers. We have had 91 different people using the service, and a small number of those passengers are now using it daily. Now, going back to what I said earlier about demographics, I've been so surprised by the number of people using the service to access employment. We have some people using the service pretty much every day. I think so. If you look at my middle graph I've got there, that's demonstrating the number of bookings per passenger, and that's bookings that actually translated into journeys, not bookings that were then cancelled for whatever reason. So you can see with the high kind of red and orange bars that lots of people, so over 30 people, have used the service once, and just over 25 have used it twice. But equally, if you go to the far right of that little graph, you can see that 69 one person has travelled 69 times on the service. They're pretty much using it every single day, which has been fantastic. You can also see the slide on the left. We've had an overall growth in passenger trips, as we would expect. You can see a dip around the bank holiday weekend because there was one fewer day of operation. And that dip kind of continued a little bit to the next week, but that was because some of our key users were on leave. And again, we've gone back up again. So we're really pleased with that. The average trip length is quite short, 4 kilometres, and it takes about 12 minutes. And then you can see in the bottom, the graph I haven't mentioned just shows the split of journeys across the week. In terms of feedback, we've had such fantastic feedback. I'm really pleased with this. So we're receiving feedback of about 55% of journeys that are made, which I think is a really high level of feedback. And that translates to just under half of all passengers who have tried the service have provided us with feedback. And that feedback has been 5 out of 5 for both driver and service. And that's such a boost for the drivers who have put in so much effort. They really are our best advocate for the service. And I've given some qualitative information as well that people have given us about how useful they find the service and what the difference it's made to them. So in terms of our next steps, what are our next steps and the conclusions for this? So as I mentioned at the beginning, it is a pilot, it's 10 months, it's funded through BSIP. It needs ongoing funding. All DDRT services require ongoing revenue funding, and that is something we need to explore going forward. We'd like to extend it. Is the funding available? That's another question. I would like to look to see if we could extend the operating hours, because I think that given the number of people using the service currently for employment, we could really capture some of the leisure market in terms of the evening economy, and also the people who are working in those restaurants and bars. And as an aside, I'm currently working on a different project in Portsmouth on tackling violence against women and girls on public transport. And I really think that solutions such as DDRT play such a role in the toolkit to help us combat that, because it's that kind of more bespoke service. People feel more secure using it, not just women and girls, but especially in the evening, when you're by yourself, people feel less vulnerable using a service such as PompeyLink. I think an ongoing conversation needs to be how we can retain the shared costs and the shared functionality across our authorities after the FTZ funding expires or ceases, as it was only a time-limited project. I think devolution might provide us with some scope to have a framework around those discussions and to look at the opportunities of commissioning over a wider area. We are in the fast track devolution kind of government tier, so we're looking at a mayor next year. Perhaps devolution will provide some answers in terms of the long-term future of DDRT and funding for DDRT in our area. And thank you very much. That's me done.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And you asked the question if there is some questions, and I think we can do a short time for the question. The first one, very interesting question from Duncan East. DDRT is regularly linked to dial-a ride, but to be successful at filling gaps in public transport, DDRT needs to be used by a wide cross-section of people. How to promote DDRT as a mass transit Uber rather than a service just for the elderly and less mobile, particularly in rural areas without much public transport?
Absolutely. So certainly from my experience, it would be engaging with employers to push the message that people can use DDRT to access employment. I'm lucky in my geographical area that it's urban, and that it's kind of a captive market in terms of people of businesses that are served within Port Solent. However, I think in order to get a wider demographic of people using the service, it's that kind of, it needs to come from employments pushing that message out to people, so that it's not just your traditional dial-a-ride type users, of which I've got a lot of experience with in previous roles. And that's a fantastic function that DDRT has, and a really important function, and one that's underestimated, I think, in terms of the social value overall that DDRT provides. It comes at a cost, but it offers a saving in terms of in enabling people to be independent in their homes for longer. But then in terms of that wider demographic, I think it's the college and employment opportunities, I think, are the things that need to be pushed.
Thank you for your answer. Just a quick question for the understanding from Alan Nettleton. Sorry if I missed it. What does the first D stand for DDRT?
Oh, it depends who you ask, I think, that question. In our case, it's dynamic, but it can be digital. It's just a furthering from the DRT traditional kind of terminology. So that's all, dynamic or digital, whichever you prefer. Ours is dynamic.
Thank you very much. And maybe a few more questions. There's a lot of questions. Thank you very much. From Barry Connor, in the Solent transport bid, was there any attempt made to include non-emergency patient transport, PTS? It seems that the involvement of PTS is essential to achieve critical mass of demand. I think that this question is you already answered a bit.
Yeah, and I can say a bit more about that. So in a previous role, I've worked with non-emergency transport, the PTS kind of solution, and looking to see whether we can integrate that into community transport. And actually, whilst they were really open to the idea, from a PTS perspective, and bear in mind they're the ones with the kind of the big bucks, as it were, they're the ones who are going to spend the money and need to make sure that works for them. They seem to prefer a one-stop shop, and community transport can't not upskill, that's the wrong word I'm looking for, can't upgrade the fleet to such an extent to cover such a wide ranging service. So it meant that it's quite difficult for community transport providers to kind of find themselves part of the PTS solution if the health providers want that to be a one-stop shop with one contract, with one supplier. It would need to rely on the kind of relationship, the subcontracting relationship between the successful PTS supplier and then the community transport providers in the local area.
Thank you. And another question from Roger Sexton. Is there any through tickets between Pompey Link and existing fixed bus routes? And a few, maybe needs a few more explanation about the £1 fare.
Okay.
About
Yep. So the £1 fare, basically the £1 fare I put in place to link Pompey Link, the users of Pompey Link from Port Solent to their closest bus service. So it's not a very long journey, but it's too long to walk, especially if you have a mobility impairment or if you're carrying a lot of shopping. So the £1 journey was literally the very first bus stop on the bus network. You paid £1 and you access that bus stop. In terms of through ticketing, we haven't yet, and that's because it was a trial and a pilot. However, we do have an integrated ticket across the Solent region called Solent Go that's been in place for a number of years. We have that integrated back office that we could integrate Pompey Link into. It needs to wait until I have some more certainty over the funding period I have and the contractual period that the service operates for in order for me to invest in that kind of development that would need to happen.
Okay, I think three more questions. Thank you very much for your all questions. Maybe there is some that we will ask at the end of the two presentations because Lisa and Pranav can both answer these questions. From Duncan East. So about the Breeze app for the Solent region, which is shutting down with funding running out. And the question is, when individual transport providers have their own app, how can an integrated app pay for itself when a booking fee is likely to push user back to cheaper individual apps?
And that's a million-dollar
Hard
question, I
question.
think. I think that's the thing that everyone's asking. You're right. So Breeze and its competitors or its peers across the country is an expensive initiative. It costs a lot of money to provide Breeze, to develop Breeze, and to continue to fund Breeze. And the four authorities didn't have the funding available to continue it, which is a real shame because it's been a popular initiative with its users. I think that there needs to be I think devolution probably would provide some of an answer for this because when you're looking at a wider geographical area all the time, there might be more impetus to invest in a service like this. But you're right, the cost of it is so exceeds the passengers will go to the cheapest solution. And if that's not Breeze, then Breeze can't generate the income. And I think that it probably needs time and dedicated policy to come up with an alternative to kind of solution for that. No, I've not really got the answer because it is such a difficult one. I know that Solent Transport will be doing a kind of end report and looking at lessons learned, and they'll come up with some recommendations for the future as a result of that. And I think that'll be a really interesting read.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's quite a tricky questions. And the last one, and the two last one maybe, because the time is running, about the size of the pumping link area, and which is quite small.
It is small.
And the question from Duncan East is, would it work? Would it need to do it differently? If we need to cover later area, maybe a reflection question. A question to think, with a lower density population.
Yeah, I think it probably would look different. I was lucky that I was able to design the service from nothing and based on the area that we're in. Previously, I worked in a large rural authority and the schemes were designed differently on that basis. And to cover a wider geographical area, I think it needs to be your tolerance for people waiting for a journey needs to be higher in a geographical area unless you're going to increase the number of vehicles you have operating. So yes, I think there's a magic formula that does probably differ in terms of your geography that you're trying to serve.
Yeah, and I think that at the end of this webinar, we could ask the same question to Pranav,
Pranav,
maybe.
yeah.
Of course. And maybe for the last question about Sunday services, because you talk about the potential extension of schedules. And what about the Sunday, and especially to be a real alternative to the car?
Oh, I'd absolutely love to provide a Sunday service. Absolutely love to. It depends on our funding settlement from government in terms of BSIP going forward. But I would really love to provide that Sunday service. I think that in terms as we're seeing that it's leisure and employment that are the two key drivers of patronage on the service, Sundays it seemed to be something that we would need to cover if we wanted to really maximise the service potential. All depends on funding.
Okay, and the last one, sorry, this one
Sorry?
is very interesting. What's the PA net cost of the service at the moment for passenger? It's about the per passenger subsidy and the ratio with the cost of the service. If you have
Yeah,
this answer, maybe you don't
I
have it right now.
I I do. I mean, when we first started, I don't mind saying it was eye-watering. And we're now getting towards my aim is these services are expensive and they are always going to cost a lot of money. My aim would be somewhere between 15 and 25 pounds per passenger trip. We're we're close, we're kind of double that at the moment. So we're getting there, and each day, each week, it's coming down. I have a little rolling subsidy calculator that I obsess over most days, and we're getting there. It just needs to be used by more people, and we're not seeing lots of ride refusals. There is definitely space to build the patronage further on the service, and that's why I'm so pleased that we're so proactive with our publicity and our marketing, because that's what will achieve that. And I'm especially looking forward to seeing how that grows over Christmas.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. And maybe just a quick question about the sorry, but I'm very fond of the questions. So and they're very good. And last one is maybe about the role of the taxis in DRT. Maybe if you experimented that during the construction of Pompeii Link, if
Yeah,
you and about yeah, what are the because there is like restricted operators, community
yeah,
transport group about DRT, and also taxis working
yeah.
with DRT. So the question is from Tony Mullane, and what role are for them now in this integration of DRT services?
Okay, so if in terms of Pompey Link, there isn't a taxi integration. However, when we went out to tender for the service, it was an open tender, open to every operator. So it could have been a taxi who won that, a taxi company who won that contract, as much as it could be a community transport operator or a big traditional bus operator. In the past, I've experimented with taxi bus services. So, using that restricted legislation that's available in the Transport Act to enable taxis to provide a scheduled bus service. Um, and I think that the success of that model, I'm there for that model. I think that it would be lovely if there were more examples of that throughout the country. I think the success relies on a really engaged taxi operator who understands the legislation, who's keen to get into this kind of area and is keen to take the risk in terms of, I mean, it would be a subsidized service, presumably any kind of taxi bus service, but it would really take the risk in terms of the time it would take to set up such a service, and that potentially it could fold or it could be a success. It's that kind of what their risk appetite is, as well as their kind of interest in that area. I think it's so with taxis, in my experience, and I've got experience over homeschool transport, over taxis, kind of share type systems. It really does depend on the operator and their attitude and their interests.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And I think we could ask this question again also to Pranav and to you at the end of this webinar. So thank you very much for all your
Thank you.
questions and for intervention, Lisa, and your very good answers. And now I think we can let speak Pranav about the province of Zeeland. So Pranav, I'll let you take the floor now.
Perfect. I believe you could see my screen in the slideshow mode already. Perfect. So yeah, my topic for today is going to be about integrated transport. And the title I chose to go with is One Network, Many Operators, but having a single experience. So I'm speaking from a very software perspective, software provider perspective. And my idea today is to take you on this journey to see, how you can have one single platform with multiple operators, but by operators, not just bus operators, but also you referring to different users of the platform, and still offer a single experience to different user groups. So how am I going to do this? The idea is to just firstly present a bit about me, a bit about Padam, to give you a context about where we come from, speak a bit about why, from our perspective, integration has become a key subject or a key topic. So mainly starting with mutualizing DRT paratransit, and then, henceforth. Then the key challenges that we understood from a software perspective, but also touching a bit about what we understood from an operator and from an LTA perspective about integrated transport. Our learnings from Zeeland. So this is the project that we deployed this year. It's only been 5 to 6 months, but still we have learned quite a lot about what we could do with integrated transport. And lastly, where we see this evolving eventually. And then obviously I'll be open for questions and answers. So who am I? Why am I speaking here? I am working at Padam as an account exec for the Benelux market. So I've deployed several projects in Netherlands, as well as a couple in Belgium, but several more in Nordics. I have a bit of experience in the UK market as well. So my idea is to bring on the table learnings from these different markets and how regulations work over there, and how suppliers and maybe operators integrate with each other for integrated transport in these ecosystems. And where do I work, and what is Padam, and why do we have so much knowledge about integrated transport? That's because Padam is a software provider for DRT, so DDRT, you could even call it digital demand responsive transport and paratransit software. And historically, we have been working in many locations to transform territories, bringing communities together using our solutions. The company is part of Siemens. So you see in the middle section all the different companies or sister companies we work with. But thanks to being part of the ecosystem, we also have a lot of integrations that we've delivered for I would say journey planners, trip planners, passenger information systems, and that's where our knowledge comes from on how we can contribute into this total transport ecosystem. As briefly mentioned, we are present quite globally, but very centric to Europe. About 230 territories or more have deployed our solutions. We have a good mix of regional transport, integrated transport, small-scale DRTs, as well as urban paratransit projects. So it's a good mix of different use cases. So now I would like to start, along with giving you an idea of what we offer, to also start bridging the gap to what integrated transport stands for us. So as mentioned, as you saw on the slides, we come from a DRT background, from a paratransit DRT software background. So obviously, because we're a digital provider, we have interfaces that we give to operators, to PTAs, to end users. But where we start speaking about integrations is in the back office. So when it comes to deploying a demand responsive transport or a paratransit deployment, if I call it this way, there's certain things that you really need to take into consideration. So you need to be very sure of how you're deploying your project, how you're deploying your software. And now when we keep integrated transport in mind, this becomes even more important, because historically DRT has always been in rural areas, peri-urban areas, and it's still continuing. But when you speak about integrated transport, how do you link this DRT to the existing ecosystem? So that's where you need to start thinking of your service designs or how you deploy them. But in a nutshell, you could have multiple ways to deploy a DRT system, but usually you try to find the mix of coverage and patronage, or passenger per vehicle hour, because you don't want to have a DRT service that is covering a large area but having poor patronage, and also vice versa, where it's a really small area but doing a lot of trips, but then you're kind of blanking out the accessibility for the bigger region. So this is a bit of background, about DRT. I mentioned integrate a lot of times, so I think I need to also justify as to why we speak about this. And I wanted to try to paint a picture of the market in general, not just UK, but European market, as to why this happened. So historically, if you look at DRT and dial-a-ride, or like you call paratransit in the UK market, they were seen as two different systems in the past. So DRT was always seen as like a non-digital small component, in the rural areas. Well, paratransit was seen as something very urban centric, but also large-scale operations because you had to have accessibility for these users. So historically, there were two different systems. They were never integrated. They were managed quite differently. Public transport or bus transport was quite separate on its own. The funding was different, customers were different, operational models were different. But then things started to change. This is where drivers to integrate DRT and data rights started happening. From our perspective, we noticed several drivers, starting with software, and that's why companies like Padam exist, where because PTAs and operators started to think about having more dynamism or more a digital way to deploy these services and to integrate real-time data, real-time scheduling. But it's not just this. We started seeing policy shifts. We started seeing that accessibility to transport was not just restricted to paratransit, but also to DRT users. Accessibility to public transport or to bus transport in general became a big topic. Cost efficiency was a big topic as well. Obviously, prior operators were running two different systems, LTAs were running two different systems, but to minimize costs, to have more efficiency, they started to converge, started to think how we could use one single system to run both. Passenger experiences start to change. The end users want seamless mobility. They want to have an all-in-one approach. So historical way of deploying would not work, where you have to run two different systems and two different user groups. And now we also have a lot of data streams, like GTFS Flex, for example, or TransExchange as well in the UK, where we're starting to see these data formats come into play, which allows flex transport or DRT transport to be shown in the same ecosystem as public transport. And that leads me to the last driver, which is mobility as a service. And that's the biggest driver for integrated transport, where everyone in this ecosystem wants to start seeing everything in one place and not shop around for different topics or different providers for one topic each. So these were the main drivers. And we started seeing the sound of the market, but obviously we also realized there are some challenges for us to deploy. We learned in a very quick way, all these challenges can be summarized into like 4 or 5 points. So obviously when we were talking about integrated transport and combining these different services, equity was a big challenge or a big argument as well, you could call it this way. If we are combining these different services together, offering or promising accessible transport to all, we still need to be very careful that certain user groups do have specific parameters that do need to be respected. If you are a user in a wheelchair or a mobility scooter, or if your user always needs a carer, and you are mutualizing these users with DRT trips, these rules need to be respected. The second challenge we realized was scalability. Yes, you have one system that does both, but from an IT perspective, and also from an operator perspective, how scalable is the software? How big can it get? And user simplicity was another topic. Again, if you're using the same platform, you cannot have two different ways of understanding bookings and understanding trip information. They have to be universal. And lastly, this was more a challenge for operators, but also for suppliers like us, because one of the biggest drivers was cost efficiency, like I mentioned before, which meant using the same fleet for both services. So if you are using the same fleet for both services, the fleet or the way the system is designed has to be very smart in ensuring that the right person is grouped with the other right person. So these were the challenges, and obviously we worked on them, and that's why we have a project that is deployed with integrated transport. I wanted to just give you a little story of integrated transport prior, but we learned a lot from this project, and we're still learning from this project. So I just want to give you 3 slides of a bit of history of this project to give you a context from the PTA, from the supplier, and also from the Ministry of Netherlands. So it's a very nice story. Zeeland is a very interesting test bed or a use case, if I put it this way. It's a province of 13 municipalities located in the south of Holland. I think has a population of about 490,000 people. Half of its land area is water, actually. So it's a really sparsely populated region, big region, but very difficult to access. It has about 6 to 7 bus lines that still run. It has one train line that runs across the capital of Middelburg. So in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of white spots, a lot of positions in this region which are hard to get into. So the ministry realized this, the province of Zeeland obviously knew this, and together they worked on something quite interesting. They decided to try something new. So in 2023, there was funding or investment, if I call it this way, from the ministry to have a new public transport system. And this new public transport system was designed to work with existing public transport, but actually enhance it with DRT. So this was the regional planning, so where they used DRT, but not just for public transport, but they also wanted the system to be used by existing paratransit users. So the plan was set. They wanted one platform to do demand responsive transport, paratransit, and on the side of the province, what they decided to do is combine all these different operations into one single point of contact. So they created a mobility center in the province of Zeeland, which single-handedly managed the paratransit, DRT, and public transport for all 13 regions. So we are starting to see this integrated mentality coming in from all visions. So when we supplied our software for this project, which started in February of this year, the challenge was big. All the challenges that I mentioned in the slide, we obviously had to tackle all of them. And it's really running quite well. We have very good feedback on the service, about 4.9 out of 5, 4.8 out of 5 is service rating at the moment. But how does the service work? So basically, this is one of the islands where it's deployed. It's a bit in Dutch, but to just give you an idea, if you can see my cursor, all the points in circle are the hubs or the multimodal points, and the rest of the municipality was open for DRT. What that means is that when you travel from a stop-to-stop logic, so we saw the service design some slides back, the service was also promoting people to go from a stop to a multimodal stop and then connect to existing public transport, because this was also something that they requested in the project, where I, as an end user, for example, I have the visibility of what is the next bus I can take or the train I could take if I'm going to multimodal stop. On top of this, obviously, as mentioned in the previous slide, it was open for people with reduced mobility, with mobility scooters, with wheelchairs. But to ensure that there is a good change management process, they are still using their existing legacy system, which is integrated into our platform. This was done mainly as a temporary purpose to ensure the mobility scooter users or the wheelchair users or the paratransit users are not suddenly asked to use something very new. But what we are achieving is actually one platform that is combining both these user groups. The province is using the same fleet for both of them, and it's being managed very well, where we have not seen a lot of issues where we are grouping wrong scenarios. And we have actually managed to reduce the amount of fleet they would have needed if they were running this as two separate systems. This system is super new. It's expected to scale up to about 300 vehicles eventually and about 10,000 trips a day. Why do I say eventually? It's because we are, like I said, we only launched in Q1 2025. We have gone to a second municipality now, sometime in the Q2 of 2025. There's still 11 municipalities to cover, but already we are seeing how this integrated transport of demand responsive transport, paratransit, and public transport visibility is live. On top of this, as I mentioned 2 slides prior, the province decided to have a single entity responsible for the whole province and the municipalities. And because of this, it became very easier for small scale operators like taxis or village taxis, like they call it, or city operators in this context, to also participate into this project, because everything was managed from a single stakeholder, or it's not a single stakeholder, but a single stakeholder entity. And this also meant that we are able to work with these small scale players, and hence the ecosystem is open for anyone to join. And where this is going to lead for the future is we're still working continuously with the province to see what other improvements we can deliver, what more can we break in the form of silos to ensure there is more and more integration possible of different systems. And this is an ongoing topic that we are continuously doing. And just to finish off where we see what comes next, I tried to paint this story across the slides. I hope it was visible. We start with no mutualization, and now we have come to a point where we see a fully merged system using the same fleet, but also showing public transport visibility. And what we see coming next is eventually integrated school transport and non-emergency patient transport, because this all answers the same question about having better optimization and better user experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pranav, for your very interesting presentation. And now I think we can, there is a quick question about fare integration in Zeeland. So on your specific example, is there fare integration in Zeeland about DRT or because I know that there is fare integration on all the networks, but on DRT?
There is no fare integration at the moment, and I think if I understand the question correctly, are you referring to using the same fare for public transport and DRTs?
Yeah, I think it's both. When you talk about fare integration, it's the integration of the DRT fare into other fares,
Okay,
and
I see what you mean.
also the same fare for DRT services. There is two aspects of fare integration. I think this one is more about if there is like through tickets or things like that.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. I mean, so I'll answer from both contexts. There is today no single ticket that you can use to access everything. But what we have done is ensure you have multiple modes to have fares that can be paid. So it's you can access it from different payment provider systems. You can pay on board. What we're also working on is, I mean, I need to give some context on this. I hope I don't speak a lot. Historically, in the Netherlands, regulations stipulate that if you are a paratransit user, you need to have subsidies, you need to have certain budgets. It's called kilometer budgets that is used. So this is something that will eventually happen as well in this project. But because it's super new, we're still keeping it super simple.
And it's a really good transition because you talked about regulation. This was the first question of this webinar. Is it easier to integrate DRT into main transport when you have heavily regulated systems as in Zeeland? Is the regulation a tool to facilitate the integration of DRT?
That is a very interesting question. I'm going to try to answer, because for me, I see this as some people could say good, some people could say negative. I'll give you my context on this, so don't shoot the messenger on this context. But to give you a bit of background, because so let's say you have regulations, so you know exactly as a supplier, as an operator, what exactly do you need to have. So in Netherlands, yes, heavily regulated. They need certain data standards that need to be met. If you need to do integrations, there is a certain way, certain data formats again that you need to use strictly. You need to strictly use data for public transport that comes from a certain source. So the good news about regulations is that you know what you need to enter into this market. It's an ecosystem that agrees collectively on what needs to be deployed. So yes, it does make it quite easier, or I would say it's much well known as to what you exactly need as a supplier or as an operator to go in there. What obviously becomes challenging is sometimes it could lead to less room for R&D or innovation in this case, which is absolutely normal. So there's two ways to look at this. I personally think it's interesting to have regulations because as a supplier, we found it, we had everything like out for us as a white paper, as you need to integrate and this is how you do it. This is what you need. So it's very different. We were able to integrate it seamlessly for this reason with multiple systems, and it's still ongoing. But regulations, I would say it makes it easier.
And maybe Lisa, you could participate to the answer. Maybe do you think that regulation could facilitate the integration of DRT? Could it be like a great tool to do that?
Yeah, I think so. I think as long as the regulation provided for some level of flexibility and local variance, I think I would encourage regulation because I think that it removes some of the risk to both supplier and,
Yeah.
from my perspective, local authority.
And just maybe to complete the question, to the answer, and from my experience of regulation of DRT services, and because you talked about flexibility, and it's a very great word to describe sometimes the obstacles of regulation of DRT. Because you don't know in advance sometimes how many kilometers you will do, how many passengers you will have. You try to know, but it's complicated. And when you have a regulated service, you can have some surprises sometimes. You can have the double of kilometers, the double of vehicles, and you need to enter into like a negotiation. And in regulated services, it's not that flexible. But in non-regulated services, it's more flexible, but you have less guarantee. So you have to know what you want to do, of course. And maybe the last question about Zealand, and then the more global questions to both of you. It was about the costs per passenger journey. Pranav, are you able to share this information about annual cost or cost per passenger?
I actually wouldn't even have this information,
Yeah.
unfortunately, because it's more for the transport authority or the province. As unfortunately, I don't have that. Sorry for that.
Yeah. Sorry, John Carr, we can't have this information. Can't have this information. It's not for the software provider. So thank you very much. Now we have time for like global questions. And one topic very interesting, it's about the integration challenges. There's a few questions about this, with a little bit of context. For example, about from John Carr, who talks about the ring and ride in Flintshire, showed that 3% coming off the long-term unemployment with these services of DRT, and about also the social and economical costs. Because it says that it saved, sorry, almost £7,000 per year. And so the question is if we can value the social and environmental and other personal and community benefits. Does DRT turn from too expensive to value for money solution in areas where conventional buses and other sustainable modes do not go? Very interesting question.
I
So
mean, I'm happy
maybe,
to take it, Pranav, or do you want to go
yeah, of
first?
course.
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Yes, John. I think that probably what needs to happen is, as a sector, we probably need to come together, and it probably needs government support too. And I think to be honest, this is happening at the moment, and understand how much emphasis that we should be placing on social value or cost avoidance. There's another way of looking at it. Cost avoidance in terms of calculating the value for money for our services. So how much cost avoidance is generated for local authorities by X person using a DRT service and having a DRT service versus not. And so, but that's quite a big question, because it, it's easy to measure, I don't know, your distance from A to B. That's an easy measurement, and that's a measurement that no one will argue with. It's a map. But what's more hard to measure is someone's loneliness, for example, and then the impact of that loneliness on their health. And I think until we've got a kind of industry standard widget to assign to loneliness or to additional healthcare or to the cost of not being able to engage in employment or education, I don't think we can further that conversation as much as we need to. And that's what I would like to see. I'd like to see, and I know that the Community Transport Association, for example, they've done a lot of work on social value, and they're probably the most advanced in that field. But I would like to see more on that, because I think it's a really key point, specifically for local authorities. If they can understand that by putting money in this space, it reduces the amount of money they need to spend in this space. That's a proper constructive conversation to be able to have with funding bodies.
Maybe Pranav, you will want to add some
I think this was very clear, because I think I was going to point out that, as again, we're coming from a software provider perspective, it's difficult for us to have this scope and how it works. But I'm fully aligned with what Lisa said, because the initiatives the CTA is doing, for example, in the UK, is a very good example. They're really trying to dig down and study to see how we can perhaps, I want to use the right word, not change, but enhance what is already running, which is very interesting for community transport, for connecting these people. And so yeah, I'm fully aligned with the answer. And from a software perspective, we are obviously supporting this initiative where and how possible, to ensure that the change is not too drastic, if I put it this way.
Thank you, both of you, for your answers. And more about the organization of DRT now, and the concrete construction of DRT. From John Carr, what happens if an essential partner refuses to buy in to the fares income distribution model? What are the guarantee? What are the how you can ask to an essential partner to buy into your distribution model?
I'm happy to go again. I think you've got your tools available to you, haven't you? So if it's an essential partner that's contracted, that's one thing, because you can contract them to buy into whatever they need to buy into. I think that if it's not a contracted partner, then you've got to develop those really strong partnership relationships, understand their perspective, why they're not keen, and try and work to a position that both of you could be satisfied in. And I think that if you really can't get that person on board, then that's when we, as local authorities or transport providers, would look to our kind of governing bodies. So I don't know, the CPT, for example, for bus services, in terms of advice and support, because I think that you can only go so far with some in some situations, and that it might need to be something that does become regulated if it becomes a barrier for either operator or local authority regularly. It's something that might need some form of, I don't know, policy framework around it.
Thank you, Lisa. Pranav, do you think you can have some elements on this?
And not on this one, I think so. I think that's
All
perfect.
right. But maybe on this one more about the steps to integrate commercial and community DRT with non-emergency patient transport in order to achieve a global total transport solution. How can we go from a non-emergency patient transport to a global transport solution?
Yeah, I think that's something I could certainly have a little bit input on. And I think what we have seen working for the current integrations that are going on between DRT paratransit is there needs to be a buy-in from all stakeholders. And I think that kind of also answers some of the previous questions that were answered, about fares, etc. as well. It's all kind of links to this buy-in. If you take Zeeland for an example, the buy-in was big. The ministry was the one that gave this contract out on behalf of the province. So which meant that the province had bought into the system, the 13 municipalities bought into the system. When I say system, I don't mean even Padam, I mean the idea or the concept of the system itself. So if you're thinking about NEPT and school transport, then the buy-in needs to come from the big stakeholders. The current, I would say the schools, or maybe the hospitals even, or these specialized operators that are running these services, they need to kind of understand and come together on common framework, or how is this supposed to operate, because if until that maybe doesn't happen, it's going to be very difficult. If you have to deploy the same integration 10 times, it's much more difficult than doing the same thing once, when you have a sort of framework and a regulatory approach on what are the key steps that one as a supplier, and second as an operator, and third as a PTA need to do for these services. So it is in process. That's why that was part of my slides to say, I think that for me will be the next step. It's challenging, obviously, because we're speaking about very, I would say, as user groups that are very sensitive as well when it comes to NEPT, for example, as well as school children. So it will take time, but there are signs that this is probably going to happen eventually.
Thank you, Pranav. Maybe Lisa, you want to add some elements on but it was a different situation in Portsmouth because it was like a white paper. But maybe in the thinking of the service, was the non-emergency patient transport like the starting point and then to go to a total trustment solution, or was it truly the lack of north-south bus routes, or
Yeah,
it was quite, yeah.
it really was. So this particular example, it just the patient transport element didn't come into this particular example at all. As I said before, I have worked in that area before, and we've looked at it from a kind of county-wide perspective, and that has a very different, I don't know, a very different set of kind of requirements because it's such a massive beast, the patient transport area. But equally, PompeyLink does its part by enabling access to hospitals that wasn't there already, for employees and for patients, which that kind of makes sure we're offering that entire journey, all the journey opportunities that would be needed to the community, I think. And I was keen to link the hospital because it is such a major destination for the local area.
Thank you. And then also on the construction of the service, and very interesting question and from Barry Connor. In order to make the service more attractive to people with mobility problems who find it difficult to get to bus stops, are you likely to reconsider running the service door rather than bus stops to stops only to bus stop only? Very interesting question. Maybe Lisa, let you begin.
I'm happy with that. So I've in my career, I've run many DRT services. Some have been doorstop to doorstop, literally curb to curb, I guess you'd call it. Others have been bus stop to bus stop, and I think the ideal is probably amalgamation of both. I think that if I hadn't have had such an extensive network of bus stops, I would have done more location to bus stop rather than bus stop to bus stop. And all of our literature does say that if you have a reason why you cannot access your closest bus stop, give our call centre a ring and we'll discuss a better location for you. I think that accessibility is absolutely key. There's literally no value in us running 2 wheelchair accessible vehicles around the local community if we don't take the vehicles to people who can't get to the bus stops. It's an absolute something I wanted to really make sure that we achieved was that key accessibility for all members of the community, and something that wasn't there before. So predominantly bus stop to bus stop, but yeah, absolutely open to location.
Maybe Pranav, you have some elements in this.
Yeah, no, I think what Lisa said is good, and I think what's happening in Zeeland after it's kind of a nice continuation, Lisa, what you said, like and because in Zeeland there is door to door, but there is a reason for that as well because the area is huge. We are talking about the region versus compared to 13 municipalities, so there needs to be a certain door to door kind of trips for paratransit users. It's only restricted to users for Dial Red and Paratransit, and at the moment it's kind of only for them. And this is not fully operational for all the DRT services. We did this for a reason to ensure that DRT is mainly being used from a stop to stop, kind of in line with what Lisa said. That's what we want to do, is promote PT, not ensure that everyone is going like a taxi everywhere where they want to go. And the door to door is only restricted for people who actually need it. So people with wheelchairs and problems walking. So they're both operating, but the stop-to-stop model is, of course, the one which has the most traffic at the moment.
Yeah, and if I could add some elements on DRT services and door-to-door. For accessibility problems, I know that there are, like in France, some door-to-door DRT, but only for people with accessibility problems. So there is like a card that you need to apply for, a national card, which gives you the right to access to this type of transport. And then we have bus stop to bus stops. But it's a very interesting question because I think it's more a political question than a technical question, in fact. Because you can, and Lisa, your answer was very interesting because you can adapt, in fact, the bus stop to bus stop service to the people and with like human adaptability, in fact. as you said. And finally, the construction of a door-to-door service is more of a political question, like a big solution for everyone, and then but a very expensive one. And when you put that in place, it's hard to go back then because people are used to have the transport just in front of their home. So quite complicated sometimes, but very interesting question and very good answers. And then other questions also on and very interesting question again from John Carr about the financing, in fact, and of the TRT about on peri-urban areas, saying that households relocating from urban areas often have poor or no access to public transport. And the question is about maybe to have like not a car-based lifestyle. It would be interesting that developers, so building developers, could be so the developers could be required to provide DRT. It's a very good question. It's quite, I think, quite a tricky question also because it's touches a very good point, which is like the private construction of households in peri-urban areas, and then the public authority is asked to provide transport services. So, Lisa, is it a point that you mentioned in your?
It's absolutely a point. So not specifically in my current role here at Portsmouth. Portsmouth is very densely populated. We don't have much space for new developments, but I have worked in a really rural area previously. And absolutely. So when new developments would come on board, and as the Transport Authority, we were consulted. I had a number of developments where instead of the traditional Section 106 funding being put aside for bus services, I specified that it ought to be a demand responsive transport option. Specifically, we had one which was going to be a distribution hub. So there would be a lot of shift workers. And I really saw DDRT or DRT as a really good solution for those shift workers, because it's much DRT lends itself to that kind of model of work more than a traditional bus where you'd have two full vehicles twice a day or whatever, and then it wouldn't be doing so much. So the idea was you'd have the vehicles that would provide the shift function and also be able to be used by the local community in the off-peak functions, off-peak time. So I absolutely agree. I think local authorities probably are specifying that developers should provide DRT services with their Section 106 funding to respond to the transport needs of new developments, because otherwise you're right, we bake in car as the only option, and that's wrong for both environmental terms but also our long-term and economic aspirations for the area.
Thank you for answer. Pranav, is it something that you could have meet in your with some authorities?
Shed some light on what we see in European markets, and it's kind of synonymous actually. So housing developments pop up everywhere, and now if you look, I mean, I'm just doing a random number, but on average, most of these locations are nowadays located quite far away from the major cities for two main reasons: the cost of land as well as construction, etc. And what Lisa said is absolutely right. Now, if you don't consider transport as one of the key points when considering these locations to build, all you do is end up using cars. So we have seen this pop up a lot. These questions are coming up quite thick and fast actually for the last 1 year from a supplier side, where we have been asked, what's our perspective on having this kind of service. There is a service that we do. It's not exactly similar. We do a service in Heathrow for Go. It's called Go to Gate. It's basically kind of covers this topic where a lot of the staff lives in this area. It's not far from Heathrow, and this DRT basically goes on like virtual stops everywhere around this area to ensure that it's picking up everyone. And after a certain point, it goes straight to the airport. Because historically, if this was not there, they would be using their cars. I mean, it's not the same example, but the idea to give you that if you don't have residents, if you have new residences and you don't have transport access, it will lead to, your mobility plan is getting, it's not working, because if you want accessibility, then you need to offer transport. So yeah, it's a very relevant topic.
And just to complete, I think that in Germany, in the München state, there is a tax for housing developers if they build parkings for the people, they have to pay a tax. And this tax is to finance the public transport. And it's a very interesting tool, very very touchy tool because it's quite risky in a political way to do that. But there is some example of this in Europe now to finance public transport with the housing development. And maybe one last question, maybe, or we have some time. In fact, we have some time for the questions, so it's great. And I'm more used to don't have time for questions. We will be back to the fair now, to the fairs now, about the also so the buying into of the operators into revenue distribution model. And it's very interesting question because with the because now we can pay with the credit card into buses to have the tickets. And so the question is, what could be interesting, in fact, for an operator to buy into revenue distribution model and business case? In fact, what could attract a private operator to buy into a public model in terms of revenue distribution model? Do you think that this question could did you see that question, Lisa or Pranav, when you worked? It's very interesting, in fact, because it questioned the relationship between the public authority, the relation between public authority and the private operators, and about how could a public service could be put into a place, in fact. But yeah, I think it's quite hard question, John, but very interesting one. Very, very interesting one. Maybe more a question for Lisa about the lessons about the question of cross-border transport and DRT cross-border transport in the Blackwater Valley, and with experiences that has been led in the north of the UK. And did you see those experiences in your work?
Yeah, so I saw that question from Mike in the Blackwater Valley. So absolutely, the lessons learned from PompeyLink could be applied elsewhere in the local area. So the Blackwater Valley is north of Hampshire, and absolutely we could look to see, that's a very urban area too. You've got the communities of Aldershot and Farnborough and Farnham and Camberley and kind of Guildford, that area. And we could look to see how PompeyLink, if you were to model the PompeyLink kind of initiative on another urban area and similar demographics, what would happen? Yeah, there's certainly lessons I can share with my colleagues in Hampshire and have done.
And as is good transition to for the next question from David. How is Zeeland going to work with the mayoral combined authority of Hampshire and Isle of Wight, the new mayor and future DRT and bus and coach services, with services cuts in Hampshire and the Fairlink cut from Ice to Southampton cuts?
Yeah. Okay. So that's fine. So Zeeland Transport is a strategic partnership. So that how that works with the combined authority, we don't know yet, is basically the answer to that question. It needs to be resolved, and I guess it will be down to how the new mayor wants it to look and wants it to work. And yes, I'm well aware of Hampshire's budget pressures and the really difficult decisions that my colleagues at Hampshire have had to make about service funding and where they can no longer afford to provide services. That again is something that's going to have to play out as part of the devolution discussions when we understand how much budget we actually have for our area and whether the pressures that are leading to budget issues in other areas. So for example, in Hampshire, the pressure of the school transport budget is so huge that it's obviously making it very difficult to balance the books generally there. whether those pressures are somehow dealt with in local government reform and devolution, there's a lot to play out, and we're not at the point where we can make any decisions, because as officers, it's not our decision to make. We need to wait for the mayor to be in place, understand their priorities, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And on this, I think in this answer on integration and the perspective of integration of DRT in complex systems, I think we can end this webinar. Thank you very much, Pranav and Lisa, for your presentation. It was really interesting and brilliant. Thank you very much. Happy to see you again on this subject. Thank you, everyone, to be here at this webinar and for your questions, very interesting questions. And so have a good day, have a good day and a good week. Bye, everyone. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.